This is the Practicing Christian. Today, the uncomfortable Christian. There used to be a lot more of them. Christians whose lives were visibly marked by an excess of devotion, self-sacrifice, worry, fear, a sense of worthlessness, and by sorrow. In part, this had to do with a nagging uncertainty about whether we would be saved, brought to heaven, loved, or even accepted by God, and raised from the dead into Christ's new Jerusalem. This likely, I suspect, grew out of the long time period between Christ's resurrection and whatever year, like AD 523 or 1492 or 1941, in which any particular Christian was living. Many must have wondered, since he said he'd come back soon, was he ever coming back? And especially, was he coming back for me? There was for some a nagging uncertainty that he might never come back. Another cause was certainly the fear of unworthiness. For this is a God who said we must be perfect. Many scholars believe, as John Wesley did, that we're to be working at perfecting our love for others. Go read the verses just before this one, Matthew 5:43-48, and note that the Greek word here translated as perfect is translated in three other places as mature. You'll see that when Jesus said this, he likely meant keep on as you become more mature Christians, trying to match the love of God in your relations with others. We work at becoming more like Jesus, but we never get all the way, ever. Our overtly expressed sorrow can seem to appear that we're saying, I worry myself sick because I just don't trust that Christ's paid the price for my life. I must have to do something dreadfully hard, some work to add to this, mustn't I? The ordinary Christian who frequently sees this in other men must feel that he himself has no chance at all of either being saved or, more importantly, of loving other men and women as effectively as Christ wants us to do. So if we're self-loathing, we'll think God foolish for wanting us. Many think themselves fools for believing they have any value, and that others may be foolish for even trying to be of value. And all these can make us doubt God's wisdom in wanting to save such a miserable bunch of creatures as us. Still, a third reason might have been that the most devoutly self-punishing men frequently went into monastic and priestly work. Certainly this must mean that if the best of us are worried about being unworthy, the rest of us must be in deep yogurt for certain. And these men often taught and preached from their own fear of their unworthiness, more than from the gospel of Christ. And lastly, just as more and more taxes get piled on by mature governments, people were often met by growing bureaucratic church offering for cash money escape from purgatory, at least the cutting down of the time spent there, or a way to help loved ones get out quicker. It must have been difficult for even a believing, practicing Christian not to worry himself sick over whether he'd somehow failed to make the cut and would himself suffer endless torment. These ancient church practices of indulgences that were such a problem have long since been done away with, but the office of the apostolic penitentiary is still busy. Most recently with a special Jubilee Year of Mercy established by Pope Francis, which includes the absolution of sins. Indulgences were also granted by the Orthodox churches, but only by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and even then not for the past 75 years. Yet if the Constitution of the Catholic Church states that it, quote, intervenes with its authority to dispense to the faithful, provided they have the right dispositions, the treasure of satisfactions which Christ and the saints won for the remission of temporal punishments, close quote, doesn't this add to the base of worry that clouds many Christians' joy in their salvation through Christ? If these absolutions from a, quote, heavenly treasury, close quote, can be granted, then we must all be in potentially deep trouble. You don't keep bandages around unless people are always banging their shins, right? Oh, by the way, Protestant pastors have an equivalent to indulgences. They sometimes talk so much about money and ask their people to increase their giving so often that it makes many feel uncomfortable about how they manage their own finances and guilty about how much or how little they give to the church. So why do churches do this? The Barna Group reports that only 4% of Americans tithe. That's 10% of income. 25% of American Christians give no money at all. The average regularly attending churchgoer gives 6% of after-tax income. This figure is skewed by a handful of very generous givers. The median annual giving for an American Christian is $200, just over 0.5% of after-tax income, and about 5% of American Christians provide 60% of the money churches receive. It's these people who skew the average mentioned above. So Christians can feel uncomfortable about their relations with God due to their own self-doubts and anxieties in general. Money grubbing in sometimes needful churches, fearful clerics expressing their own distress, the perceived silence of God, and even, with deep belief, a nagging worry that we may not be making just the right moves and practices in our Christian life. But we don't have to look at these religious questions to understand how many people feel inadequate to God's call to us. Remember how you felt when you were called to the principal's office? Gut-wrenching fear wasn't unusual even for impossibly perfect pupils. If someone at your office says, "Oh, your wife called, she wants you to call back as soon as you can," there's a fair chance that the screen of your mind will start unrolling some awful scenarios when it might just mean that an old college buddy is in town for a few days. What to do? For starters, recognize that all people of whatever faith or faithlessness suffer such anxieties. Then try to recall how you first got some of these ideas. My mother never spoke to me about God at all, except when I did something she didn't like. She'd say, "God's going to punish you for that." And as a small child, I heard that sentence as, "God's going to punch you for that." Let go of such past misreadings of God as much as you can. Practice prayer with others who are on the long road to spiritual maturity. Read the Bible until you get completely bored with that angry God who keeps on forgiving his disobedient people over and over again because he loves them so much. Realize and remember that God is setting before us every opportunity possible to find joy in his work of salvation for us through his Son's dreadful sacrifice. And not so we can just go around with long faces thinking and saying, "Oh, woe is me." Don't be like a shoe salesman who says, "I'll bet these hurt, don't they?" every time he helps somebody try on a new pair of shoes. That's the way a distressed and uncomfortable Christian must seem to an unbeliever who's just learning about God. Is all this self-torture the way of Jesus? There can indeed be discomfort, pain, and sorrow in our Christian lives, but that's usually when we're being faithful and fully loved by God, yet in the hands of angry men, like ISIS militants or the Chinese authorities who are now clamping down on Christians. Is the real work of Christ is being faithful and loving, and trouble comes your way, suck it up, take the pain. But don't go looking for pain and suffering when it's only in your anxious mind. Be ready for it if the world unjustly puts it on you. Remember, if we wear ourselves out with piety and self-destruction, we're saying we don't trust God to see us safely through this world. But shouldn't we be sorrowful for Christ's agonizing death? Yes, but we don't build our lives out of perpetual sorrow. What did God tell us? Number 1, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second, like it, is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. And that's in Mark 12, beginning at verse 30. Number 2 of what God said to us, I received from the Lord what I also handed to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, took a loaf of bread, and when he'd given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way he took the cup also after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this, as often as you drink it, in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." 1 Corinthians 11, beginning 23rd verse. This is what we build our lives from. Loving, remembering, being thankful. We're called to trust him, love him, witness to him, and love all with whom we come in contact or whom we affect. Period. Serve then. Be the king's right arm.